Welcome to True.
The United States, A Century of Transformation, 1925 to 2025. Introduction. Welcome to this comprehensive journey through 100 years of American history. From 1925 to 2025, the United States has undergone transformations so profound that a citizen from the Roaring Twenties would scarcely recognize the nation today. This script explores the defining moments, cultural shifts, technological revolutions, and societal changes that shaped modern America. We'll examine how a nation of 115 million people living without televisions, computers, or antibiotics evolved into a superpower of over 330 million, connected by smartphones, and grappling with challenges our ancestors could never have imagined. Chapter 1. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Crash, 1925 to 1929. The year 1925 found America in the midst of unprecedented prosperity and cultural revolution. The Roaring Twenties represented a decisive break from the past, as jazz music filled speakeasies, flappers challenged Victorian norms, and the automobile transformed daily life. Henry Ford's assembly line had democratized car ownership, and by 1925, there were over 17 million automobiles on American roads. This was the era of Prohibition, when the 18th Amendment had outlawed alcohol, inadvertently creating a massive underground economy controlled by gangsters like Al Capone. Cities like Chicago and New York became battlegrounds for bootleggers, while ordinary citizens frequented illegal bars and nightclubs. The contradiction between law and practice revealed deep tensions in American society about personal freedom and government authority. The economy seemed unstoppable. The stock market soared as ordinary Americans invested their savings, often buying shares on margin with borrowed money. New consumer products flooded the market: radios, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines. Advertising emerged as a powerful force, creating desires and defining the American dream in material terms. Credit buying became common as the phrase, "buy now, pay later," entered the national vocabulary. Culturally, America was experiencing a renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance brought African-American art, literature, and music to national prominence, with figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington challenging racial barriers through their creativity. F. Scott Fitzgerald captured the era's glamour and emptiness in The Great Gatsby, while silent films gave way to talkies with the 1927 release of The Jazz Singer. But beneath the glittering surface, warning signs appeared. Agricultural America was already in depression, as farmers struggled with debt and falling crop prices. Income inequality widened dramatically, with the wealthiest 1% controlling nearly a quarter of the nation's wealth. The stock market had become disconnected from economic fundamentals, driven more by speculation than genuine value. On October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday arrived. The stock market crashed, wiping out billions in paper wealth overnight. Banks that had invested depositors' money in stocks failed by the thousands. The crash didn't cause the Great Depression alone, but it shattered confidence and triggered a cascade of economic failures that would define the next decade. Chapter 2. The Great Depression and the New Deal, 1930 to 1939. The 1930s began with America descending into its darkest economic crisis. By 1933, unemployment reached 25%, with 13 million Americans out of work. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and families lost their homes and farms. Breadlines and soup kitchens became common sights in every major city. The Dust Bowl compounded the misery, as severe drought and poor farming practices turned the Great Plains into a wasteland, forcing hundreds of thousands to migrate westward in search of work. President Herbert Hoover, elected in 1928, proved unable to halt the economic freefall. His belief in limited government intervention and voluntary cooperation seemed inadequate to the crisis. In 1932, desperate Americans elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a landslide, giving him a mandate for dramatic change. Roosevelt's New Deal represented a fundamental reimagining of the federal government's role in American life. In his first 100 days, FDR pushed through Congress an avalanche of legislation creating alphabet soup agencies, the CCC, WPA, TVA, SEC, and many others. The government became an employer of last resort, putting millions to work building infrastructure that still serves America today: roads, bridges, dams, schools, and post offices. The Social Security Act of 1935 created a safety net for elderly Americans, fundamentally changing the relationship between citizens and their government. The Wagner Act protected workers' rights to organize unions, leading to the explosive growth of organized labor. The Fair Labor Standards Act established a minimum wage and 40-hour work week. These reforms, bitterly opposed by business interests, created what historians would later call the social contract between government, business, and labor. Cultural life during the Depression reflected both escapism and social consciousness. Hollywood's golden age produced lavish musicals and screwball comedies offering temporary relief from hardship. Simultaneously, documentary photographers like Dorothea Lange captured the human face of suffering, while novelists like John Steinbeck exposed the plight of migrant workers in The Grapes of Wrath. The Depression also saw the rise of dangerous ideologies. Father Charles Coughlin spread anti-Semitism through radio broadcasts, reaching millions. Huey Long proposed radical wealth redistribution before his assassination. The American Communist Party gained members as capitalism seemed to have failed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany, and Japan pursued aggressive expansion in Asia. By 1939, the economy had improved but not recovered. Unemployment still stood near 15%. The New Deal had prevented complete collapse and created lasting institutions, but it took another catastrophic event to truly end the Depression, World War II. Chapter 3, World War II and American Ascendancy, 1940 to 1945. America entered the 1940s still deeply divided about involvement in another European war. Isolationist sentiment remained strong, with many Americans believing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans provided natural protection from foreign conflicts. President Roosevelt, recognizing the threat posed by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, maneuvered carefully to aid Britain while technically maintaining neutrality. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shattered American isolation. In a single morning, Japanese naval aviation killed over 2,400 Americans and destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet. The next day, Congress declared war with only one dissenting vote. Within days, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and America found itself fighting a true world war on two fronts. The American mobilization for World War II was staggering in its scope and speed. Factories that had produced automobiles switched to building tanks and aircraft. Shipyards launched cargo vessels and warships at an incredible pace. By 1943, American industry was producing more war material than all Axis powers combined. Unemployment disappeared as the economy roared to life. 16 million Americans served in the armed forces. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking jobs in factories, shipyards, and offices previously reserved for men. Rosie the Riveter became an iconic symbol of female contribution to the war effort. African Americans migrated from the rural South to industrial cities seeking war jobs, beginning demographic shifts that would reshape American society. Despite their contributions, both women and minorities faced persistent discrimination, planting seeds for future civil rights movements. The war touched every American family, rationing limited consumption of meat, sugar, gasoline, and countless other goods. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards and vacant lots. Scrap drives collected metal, rubber, and paper for recycling. Gold stars in windows marked homes that had lost sons or husbands. The shared sacrifice created a sense of national unity, rarely achieved before or since. Militarily, Americans fought brutal campaigns across Europe, Africa, Asia, and countless Pacific islands. D-Day on June 6, 1944, saw 156,000 Allied troops, primarily American, British, and Canadian, storm the beaches of Normandy to begin the liberation of Western Europe. In the Pacific, island-hopping campaigns brought American forces closer to Japan at terrible cost. The Battle of Iwo Jima alone resulted in 26,000 American casualties. In August 1945, President Harry Truman made the fateful decision to use atomic bombs against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly killing over 200,000 people and ushering in the nuclear age. Japan surrendered, ending the war, but beginning a new era of existential threat. America emerged from World War II as the world's dominant military and economic power, its homeland untouched by the devastation that had destroyed much of Europe and Asia. Chapter 4, Post-War Prosperity and the Cold War, 1946 to 1959. The immediate post-war years saw remarkable transformation. 16 million servicemen and women returned home seeking education, jobs, and housing. The GI Bill provided educational benefits that sent millions to college, creating an educated middle class unprecedented in human history. The same legislation offered low-interest home loans, fueling suburban expansion that would reshape American geography and culture. Economically, America dominated a war-shattered world. The dollar became the global reserve currency under the Bretton Woods system. American corporations expanded internationally, and Made in America meant quality and innovation. Unemployment remained low, wages rose steadily, and for the first time, a majority of Americans could afford home ownership, automobiles, and consumer goods that previous generations considered luxuries. The suburbs became the physical embodiment of the American dream. Developments like Levittown offered affordable houses to young families, though often with racial restrictions that excluded African Americans and other minorities. Shopping centers replaced downtown department stores. The automobile became essential as cities sprawled. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, championed by President Eisenhower, funded construction of the interstate highway system, further enabling suburban growth while often dividing urban communities. Television revolutionized American culture during the 1950s. By 1960, 90% of homes had televisions, creating a shared national experience unknown in previous generations. Shows like I Love Lucy, The Ed Sullivan Show, and Leave It to Beaver presented idealized visions of American life, while news broadcasts brought distant events into living rooms. Television also became a powerful commercial medium, shaping consumer desires and homogenizing culture. But prosperity came with profound anxiety. The Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union dominated foreign policy and shaped domestic life. The 1949 Soviet atomic bomb test ended America's nuclear monopoly. The communist victory in China shocked Americans who had viewed China as a friend. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 resulted in 36,000 American deaths, with no clear victory, introducing the concept of limited war in the nuclear age. Domestically, anti-communist hysteria reached fever pitch. Senator Joseph McCarthy accused government officials, Hollywood figures, and ordinary citizens of communist sympathies, often with no evidence. The House Un-American Activities Committee investigated suspected subversives, destroying careers and lives. The execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for espionage in 1953 reflected Cold War tensions. Schools conducted nuclear attack drills, teaching children to duck and cover under desks in the event of atomic war. Despite surface conformity, seeds of change were germinating. The 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education declared school segregation unconstitutional, though implementation faced massive resistance. Rosa Parks's refusal to give up her bus seat in 1955 sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, introducing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to national prominence. The Beat Generation writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg challenged conventional values. Rock and roll music, with its roots in African American rhythm and blues, began transforming youth culture, with Elvis Presley becoming a controversial sensation. Chapter 5. The Turbulent 60s, 1960 to 1969. The 1960s opened with youthful optimism as John F. Kennedy, at 43 the youngest elected president, promised to get the country moving again. His inaugural address challenged Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The Peace Corps sent idealistic young Americans abroad to assist developing nations. Kennedy's space program committed America to landing on the moon before the decade's end, capturing imagination and demonstrating technological prowess. But the decade quickly turned dark. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion embarrassed the new administration. The construction of the Berlin Wall symbolized Cold War divisions. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 brought humanity to the brink of nuclear war before Kennedy and Soviet Premier Khrushchev reached a tense compromise. Americans practiced civil defense drills and built backyard bomb shelters, living under the shadow of potential annihilation. The civil rights movement accelerated dramatically. Freedom riders challenged segregation and interstate transportation, facing violent mobs in Alabama. James Meredith integrated the University of Mississippi, requiring federal troops to ensure his safety. Birmingham police attacked peaceful protesters, including children, with dogs and fire hoses, shocking the nation when broadcast on television. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his immortal "I Have a Dream" speech before 250,000 people at the March on Washington. Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, traumatized America. The young president's murder, followed days later by the shooting of his accused assassin on live television, seemed to shatter national innocence. Lyndon Johnson assumed the presidency and pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965, landmark legislation that dismantled legal segregation and protected voting rights. Johnson's Great Society programs aimed to eliminate poverty and racial injustice through federal action. Medicare and Medicaid provided health insurance to elderly and poor Americans. Federal aid to education increased dramatically. Head Start helped disadvantaged children prepare for school. The War on Poverty created job training programs and community action agencies. Critics argued these programs created dependency, while supporters noted they reduced poverty rates significantly. Meanwhile, American involvement in Vietnam escalated disastrously. What began as military advisors grew into a massive commitment of ground troops, reaching 536,000 by 1968. The war, broadcast nightly on television, increasingly appeared unwinnable. The 1968 Tet Offensive, though a military defeat for the Viet Cong, shattered American confidence when the enemy proved capable of attacking throughout South Vietnam, including the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Opposition to the war fractured American society. College campuses became centers of protest, with students burning draft cards and occupying buildings. The counterculture rejected traditional values, embracing drugs, sexual freedom, and alternative lifestyles. The 1967 Summer of Love in San Francisco symbolized the hippie movement's idealism. Music festivals like Woodstock in 1969 celebrated peace, love, and music, though violence at Altamont later that year suggested the era's darker side. 1968 proved catastrophic. The Tet Offensive undermined support for the war. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination in April sparked riots in over 100 cities. Robert F. Kennedy's assassination in June, after winning the California Democratic primary, seemed to confirm that violence had become America's political language. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago descended into chaos as police battled anti-war protesters. Richard Nixon won the presidency, promising law and order and peace with honor in Vietnam. The decade ended with humanity's greatest technological achievement, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon on July 20, 1969. As Armstrong declared it, "One giant leap for mankind." An estimated 600 million people worldwide watched on television, a moment of unity in a divided decade. Chapter 6, Disillusionment and Discord, 1970 to 1979. The 1970s began with continued turmoil. The Vietnam War expanded into Cambodia and Laos, despite Nixon's promises of de-escalation. Kent State University became a symbol of division when National Guard troops killed 4 student protesters in May 1970. The Pentagon Papers leaked classified documents revealing government deception about the war, further eroded trust in institutions. Environmentalism emerged as a major movement. The first Earth Day in 1970 mobilized millions of Americans concerned about pollution, resource depletion, and ecological destruction. Congress passed landmark legislation, including the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Endangered Species Act. The Environmental Protection Agency began operations. Environmental disasters like the Cuyahoga River catching fire illustrated the need for action, while the 1973 oil embargo highlighted energy dependence. The women's liberation movement gained momentum. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique had questioned traditional gender roles, and now millions of women demanded equality. The National Organization for Women fought for economic and political rights. Miss Magazine, founded by Gloria Steinem, provided a platform for feminist voices. Congress passed Title IX in 1972, banning sex discrimination in education and revolutionizing women's athletics. The Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision legalized abortion nationwide, a decision that remains controversial decades later. The gay rights movement became visible after the 1969 Stonewall riots in New York. Homosexual Americans, long forced to hide their identities, began demanding equal treatment and societal acceptance. Harvey Milk became California's first openly gay elected official before his assassination in 1978. Watergate destroyed Nixon's presidency and further undermined trust in government. The break-in at Democratic National Committee headquarters seemed minor until journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein exposed a massive scandal involving illegal surveillance, campaign sabotage, and abuse of power. Nixon's resignation in August 1974 marked the first time a president had left office in disgrace. Gerald Ford's pardon of Nixon angered many Americans who wanted accountability. Ford's declaration that "our long national nightmare is over" proved premature as economic problems mounted. The oil embargo by Arab nations in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War caused gasoline shortages, long lines at gas stations, and economic chaos. Inflation and unemployment both rose, creating stagflation that conventional economic theory said was impossible. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 ended America's Vietnam involvement with humiliating images of helicopters evacuating the last Americans from the embassy roof. The war had cost 58,000 American lives and billions of dollars, divided the nation, and ended in defeat. Vietnam veterans often faced indifference or hostility rather than gratitude, adding personal trauma to national disillusionment. Jimmy Carter's 1976 election seemed to offer renewal through his outsider status and promised to restore honesty to Washington, but his presidency struggled with continued economic problems, energy crises, and foreign policy challenges. The Iranian Revolution and subsequent hostage crisis, with 52 Americans held for 444 days, symbolized American impotence. Carter's famous Malaise speech, though he never used that word, acknowledged a crisis of confidence in America. Yet the decade had achievements. The United States and Soviet Union signed arms control treaties limiting nuclear weapons. Relations with China improved dramatically after Nixon's historic 1972 visit. The Camp David Accords, mediated by Carter, achieved peace between Israel and Egypt. Technologically, personal computers emerged, with the Apple II introducing computing to ordinary people and suggesting a coming revolution. Chapter 7. The Reagan Revolution, 1980 to 1989. Ronald Reagan's 1980 victory over Carter marked a fundamental political realignment. Reagan offered optimism, declaring, "It's morning again in America," contrasting sharply with Carter's perceived pessimism. His conservative philosophy emphasized smaller government, lower taxes, stronger national defense, and traditional values. The Reagan coalition united economic conservatives, religious fundamentalists, and hawkish anti-communists. Economically, Reagan implemented supply-side policies, cutting top tax rates from 70% to 28% while increasing defense spending dramatically. Reaganomics theorized that tax cuts would stimulate growth, generating revenue, offsetting the cuts. In practice, economic growth did accelerate after the severe 1981 to 1982 recession, but federal deficits exploded. National debt tripled during Reagan's presidency. Income inequality widened as the wealthy benefited disproportionately from tax cuts, while social programs faced reductions. Reagan confronted the Soviet Union aggressively, calling it an evil empire, and launching the Strategic Defense Initiative, a space-based missile defense system critics dubbed Star Wars. Defense spending increases put pressure on the Soviet economy already struggling with inefficiency and corruption, but Reagan also proved willing to negotiate, developing a surprisingly warm relationship with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Their summits produced arms reduction agreements that began winding down the Cold War. The decade saw significant social changes. The AIDS epidemic emerged, initially affecting gay men and intravenous drug users. The disease killed thousands, while fear and misunderstanding led to discrimination. The Reagan administration's slow response drew criticism, though Surgeon General C. Everett Koop eventually launched an aggressive public education campaign. The women's movement achieved economic gains as more women entered professions previously dominated by men. Sandra Day O'Connor became the first female Supreme Court justice in 1981, but the proposed Equal Rights Amendment failed to achieve ratification, opposed by conservatives who argued it threatened traditional family structures. The rise of the religious right as a political force transformed American politics. Organizations like the Moral Majority mobilized evangelical Christians around issues like abortion, school prayer, and traditional sexual morality. Televangelists like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson built media empires, though scandals involving Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart damaged credibility. Technology began transforming daily life. Personal computers became common in businesses and many homes. The IBM PC and clones running Microsoft DOS dominated business computing. Apple's Macintosh introduced the graphical user interface to consumers. Video games recovered from an early 1980s crash with Nintendo's Entertainment System. VCRs allowed people to record and watch programs on their own schedules. Compact discs began replacing vinyl records. Cell phones existed, but remained expensive toys for the wealthy. The stock market boom created a culture of greed, symbolized by Gordon Gekko's "Greed is Good" speech in the film Wall Street. Leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, and junk bonds enriched some while destroying companies and eliminating jobs. Insider trading scandals sent high-profile figures like Ivan Boesky to prison. The October 1987 stock market crash, with the Dow dropping 22% in a single day, temporarily shook confidence before markets recovered. As the decade closed, the Cold War ended with stunning speed. Gorbachev's reforms of glasnost and perestroika unleashed forces that destroyed communist control of Eastern Europe. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell as East Germans poured into West Berlin. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed. The Soviet Union itself would dissolve in 1991. America and its democratic capitalist system appeared to have won the ideological struggle that had defined the previous half-century. Chapter 8. The Digital Revolution begins, 1990 to 1999. The 1990s opened with America as the world's sole superpower. The Soviet Union's collapse seemed to validate American values and institutions. Francis Fukuyama proclaimed the end of history, suggesting liberal democracy represented humanity's final governmental evolution. George H.W. Bush spoke of a new world order of peace and cooperation under international law. The Gulf War in 1991 demonstrated American military supremacy. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, a U.S.-led coalition quickly drove Iraqi forces out in a campaign dominated by high-tech weapons and overwhelming air power. The war's brevity and minimal American casualties seemed to prove that technology had transformed warfare. But the decision not to remove Saddam Hussein from power created problems for the next generation. Domestically, economic recession and Bush's broken promise not to raise taxes damaged his presidency. Bill Clinton's 1992 victory, campaigning on the economy with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," brought a new generation to power. At 46, Clinton was the first baby boomer president, representing generational change from World War II-era leaders. The 1990s became an economic golden age. The Cold War's end produced a peace dividend, allowing defense spending cuts. Federal budget deficits transformed into surpluses. Unemployment fell to levels not seen in decades. Inflation remained low. The stock market soared, with the Dow Jones rising from around 2,600 in 1990 to over 11,000 by 2000. Homeownership reached record levels. Poverty declined. Median household income rose significantly. The internet transformed American life more rapidly than any previous technology. What began as a military and academic network became publicly accessible in the early 1990s. The World Wide Web, created by Tim Berners-Lee, provided a graphical interface, making the internet user-friendly. Email became ubiquitous. Online shopping emerged with Amazon and eBay. Google revolutionized information access. The dot-com boom saw internet companies achieve billion-dollar valuations despite minimal revenue, ultimately producing a speculative bubble. Cell phones transitioned from luxury items to common possessions. Digital cameras began replacing film. DVDs replaced VHS tapes. The Human Genome Project advanced understanding of genetics. Cloning became reality when scientists created Dolly the sheep in 1996, raising ethical questions. Politically, bitter partisan divisions emerged. Clinton's presidency faced constant investigations, culminating in impeachment by the House of Representatives over his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky and subsequent lies under oath. The Senate acquitted Clinton, but the scandal consumed much of his second term and illustrated how personal and political had become inseparable in media-saturated politics. Social issues continued dividing Americans. Abortion remained contentious. Gay rights advanced as more Americans came out and visibility increased through shows like Will Grace and Ellen, though the Defense of Marriage Act defined marriage as between a man and woman at the federal level. Immigration increased dramatically, particularly from Latin America and Asia, changing America's demographic composition and sparking debates about border control and assimilation. Violence shocked the nation repeatedly. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombing killed 168 people, including children in a daycare center, revealing that terrorism could come from Americans as well as foreigners. The Columbine High School massacre in 1999, with 2 students killing 13 before committing suicide, sparked debates about gun control, bullying, and youth violence. The decade ended with the Y2K scare, as concerns that computer systems would fail when dates changed from 1999 to 2000 proved largely unfounded. Americans celebrated the millennium with optimism. The economy was booming, peace seemed secure, technology promised continued progress. The future looked bright, though clouds were gathering on the horizon. Chapter 9: Terror, War, and Economic Crisis, 2000 to 2009. The new century began with controversy as the 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore remained undecided for weeks. Florida's outcome would determine the winner, with disputed ballots and competing recounts. The Supreme Court's decision in Bush versus Gore, splitting along ideological lines, stopped the Florida recount and effectively awarded the presidency to Bush. Many Democrats never accepted Bush's legitimacy, deepening partisan divisions. September 11, 2001 changed everything. 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial aircraft, crashing 2 into the World Trade Center towers in New York, 1 into the Pentagon, and 1 into a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 people died in the worst terrorist attack in American history. The towers' collapse, broadcast live to a horrified world, became the defining image of the era. America's response was swift and overwhelming. Bush declared a war on terror that would define his presidency. Congress passed the Patriot Act, expanding government surveillance powers and raising civil liberties concerns. Afghanistan's Taliban regime, which had harbored al-Qaeda, fell quickly to American military action, though Osama bin Laden escaped. Americans united in ways not seen since World War II, with approval ratings for Bush reaching 90%. The war on terror expanded dramatically with the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Bush administration officials argued that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, threatening regional stability and American security. Despite international opposition and massive protests, American and British forces toppled Saddam's regime in weeks. Bush famously declared mission accomplished in May 2003, but this proved tragically premature. Iraq descended into insurgency and sectarian violence. No weapons of mass destruction were found, undermining the war's justification and Bush's credibility. American casualties mounted as soldiers faced roadside bombs and suicide attacks. Images from Abu Ghraib prison, showing American soldiers abusing Iraqi detainees, damaged America's moral standing. The war cost thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, and trillions of dollars, dividing Americans as deeply as Vietnam had. Domestically, America experienced a housing bubble fueled by easy credit and speculation. Home prices soared as banks made loans to unqualified borrowers. Financial institutions packaged these subprime mortgages into complex securities sold worldwide, spreading risk throughout the global financial system. Warning signs appeared as early as 2006, but few recognized the catastrophe ahead. Hurricane Katrina in August 2005 devastated the Gulf Coast, with New Orleans suffering catastrophic flooding when levees failed. The inadequate federal response, particularly to poor African American neighborhoods, exposed persistent racial and economic inequalities. Over 1,800 people died, and hundreds of thousands became refugees in their own country. The economic crisis struck with full force in 2008. Major financial institutions collapsed or required government bailouts. Lehman Brothers' bankruptcy triggered global panic. Credit markets froze. The stock market plummeted. Unemployment soared, housing prices crashed, leaving millions owing more than their homes were worth. The Great Recession, the worst economic crisis since the 1930s, wiped out trillions in household wealth. Against this backdrop, Barack Obama won the 2008 presidential election, becoming America's first African-American president. His victory represented a historic milestone and seemed to herald a post-racial era. Obama's campaign theme of hope and change resonated with Americans exhausted by war and economic turmoil. His inauguration attracted massive crowds and worldwide attention. Obama inherited multiple crises. The economy required immediate action to prevent complete collapse. The auto industry faced bankruptcy. Two wars continued. Obama signed a massive stimulus package aimed at preventing economic depression. The government rescued major banks and auto companies, controversial decisions that likely prevented even worse outcomes. Socially, technology continued revolutionizing daily life. Facebook, launched in 2004, became ubiquitous. YouTube allowed anyone to broadcast video. Twitter created new forms of communication and organization. Smartphones, particularly the iPhone released in 2007, put powerful computers in people's pockets. These technologies connected people in unprecedented ways, while creating new social problems, including privacy concerns and misinformation. Chapter 10, Division and Disruption, 2010 to 2019. The 2010s saw America become increasingly polarized and technologically transformed. Obama's Affordable Care Act, extending health insurance to millions of uninsured Americans, passed without a single Republican vote after bitter debate. The Tea Party movement mobilized conservative opposition to Obama's policies, particularly healthcare reform and federal spending. The movement's energy helped Republicans gain control of the House in 2010, beginning 6 years of divided government and legislative gridlock. Economic recovery proved slow and uneven. Unemployment gradually declined, but many jobs lost during the recession never returned. Wages stagnated for most workers, while the wealthy saw their fortunes increase dramatically. The Occupy Wall Street movement, protesting economic inequality under the slogan, "We are the 99%, briefly captured attention, but produced limited concrete results. Concerns about the declining middle class and growing wealth gap dominated economic discussions. Social movements reshaped American discourse. The Black Lives Matter movement emerged after George Zimmerman's acquittal in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, gaining momentum after police killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and other African Americans. Protests erupted nationwide, forcing conversations about police violence, systemic racism, and criminal justice reform. Some saw the movement as necessary truth-telling, others viewed it as anti-police extremism. The Supreme Court's 2015 Obergefell decision legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, a stunning victory for gay rights activists after decades of struggle. Public opinion had shifted remarkably quickly, with majority support for marriage equality, but religious conservatives argued their freedom to act according to faith was threatened. The 2016 presidential election shocked the political establishment. Donald Trump, a businessman and reality television star with no political experience, defeated a crowded Republican primary field with nationalist rhetoric, promises to build a border wall, and attacks on political correctness. His campaign against Hillary Clinton, former First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State, defied conventional political wisdom. Despite losing the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, Trump won the Electoral College, becoming the 45th president. Trump's presidency was controversial from day one. His supporters praised his willingness to challenge establishment norms and fight for working-class Americans. His critics viewed him as dangerous, dishonest, and authoritarian. Trump's communications style, particularly his prolific use of Twitter, broke presidential precedent. His policies included tax cuts, conservative judicial appointments, deregulation, immigration restrictions, and challenging trade agreements. The Mueller investigation examined Russian interference in the 2016 election and potential Trump campaign coordination. The investigation dominated headlines for 2 years, revealing Russian efforts to influence the election, but not establishing criminal conspiracy. Trump's impeachment by the House in late 2019 for pressuring Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden divided Americans further. The Senate acquitted him along partisan lines. Technology companies became dominant economic and cultural forces. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google achieved trillion-dollar valuations. Their products and services touched nearly every aspect of modern life, but concerns grew about their power, their handling of user data, their role in spreading misinformation, and their effects on privacy, democracy, and mental health, particularly among young people. The #MeToo movement, sparked by allegations against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, exposed widespread sexual harassment and assault. Women shared stories of abuse using social media hashtags, leading to consequences for powerful men in entertainment, politics, media, and business. The movement empowered victims to speak out, but also raised concerns about due process and proportionality of consequences. Gun violence remained a persistent problem. Mass shootings at schools, churches, concerts, and other venues became horrifyingly common. After each tragedy, debates about gun control erupted, pitting Second Amendment advocates against those seeking restrictions. But federal legislation remained elusive due to political divisions and the influence of gun rights organizations. Climate change emerged as an urgent concern. Scientific evidence of human-caused warming became overwhelming. Young people, led by activists like Greta Thunberg, demanded action. Extreme weather events including wildfires, hurricanes, and droughts increased in frequency and severity, yet political polarization prevented comprehensive federal climate legislation, with many Republicans questioning climate science or opposing government action. Chapter 11, Pandemic and Upheaval, 2020 to 2025. The COVID-19 pandemic defined the early 2020s. A novel coronavirus emerged in late 2019, spreading globally with terrifying speed. By March 2020, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. America shut down as never before. Schools and businesses closed. Restaurants operated takeout only. Sports seasons stopped mid-play. Travel ceased. Streets emptied. Americans sheltered at home, emerging only for essential activities. The death toll mounted horrifically. Hospitals overwhelmed with critical patients faced shortages of ventilators, protective equipment, and staff. Refrigerated trucks served as temporary morgues. Over 1 million Americans ultimately died from COVID-19, more than all American combat deaths in the 20th century combined. The pandemic exposed healthcare system vulnerabilities and long-standing health disparities, with minority communities suffering disproportionately. Economic impacts were immediate and severe. Unemployment claims reached unprecedented levels. Small businesses collapsed. Essential workers risked exposure, while others worked from home via Zoom and similar platforms. The federal government implemented massive relief programs, sending stimulus checks to families and supporting businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program. The pandemic became intensely politicized. Mask mandates, lockdowns, and vaccine requirements sparked fierce debates about personal freedom versus public health. President Trump downplayed the virus's severity early on, while promoting unproven treatments. His administration's Operation Warp Speed successfully accelerated vaccine development, producing effective vaccines in record time. But vaccine hesitancy, often along political lines, complicated immunization efforts. The 2020 election occurred amid pandemic chaos. Joe Biden defeated Trump decisively in both popular and electoral votes, promising to restore normalcy and competence to government. But Trump refused to concede, making baseless claims of widespread fraud. His efforts to overturn results culminated on January 6, 2021, when his supporters stormed the Capitol to disrupt certification of Biden's victory. 5 people died in the attack. The insurrection shocked the world and led to Trump's second impeachment, though he was again acquitted by the Senate. Biden's presidency focused initially on pandemic response. Vaccine distribution accelerated dramatically. By mid-2021, vaccines were widely available to all adults. Life began returning to normal as restrictions lifted. The economy rebounded strongly, with unemployment falling rapidly. Congress passed massive infrastructure legislation and COVID relief, expanding child tax credits and unemployment benefits. The George Floyd murder in May 2020 sparked the largest protests in American history. Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, kneeling on Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, captured on video, symbolized police brutality and systemic racism. Protests erupted in all 50 states and internationally. Calls to defund the police divided communities. Some cities implemented reforms, while others increased police funding. Chauvin's murder conviction provided accountability rare in police violence cases. Afghanistan's chaotic fall in August 2021 ended America's longest war. As American forces withdrew, the Taliban rapidly conquered the country. Desperate Afghans clung to departing aircraft. 13 American service members died in a suicide bombing during evacuation operations. The ignominious end to a 20-year war that cost thousands of lives and trillions of dollars sparked recriminations about failed nation-building. Inflation surged to levels not seen in 40 years. Supply chain disruptions, massive government spending, and pent-up demand combined to drive prices up sharply. Housing costs, gasoline, groceries, and other necessities became significantly more expensive. The Federal Reserve responded with aggressive interest rate increases, cooling the economy but raising recession fears. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 shocked the world. Despite intelligence warnings, the scale and brutality of the assault stunned observers. Ukraine's fierce resistance, led by President Volodymyr Zelensky, prevented quick Russian victory. The United States and NATO allies provided billions in military and economic aid while imposing severe sanctions on Russia. The war disrupted global energy and food supplies while raising nuclear war fears as Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons. The Supreme Court's June 2022 Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade, eliminating the constitutional right to abortion after nearly 50 years. The conservative majority's ruling returned abortion regulation to states, with many Republican-controlled states quickly banning or severely restricting the procedure. The decision energized both abortion rights supporters and opponents, becoming a central issue in subsequent elections. Climate change impacts became undeniable. Record-breaking heat waves, devastating wildfires, hurricanes, and droughts occurred with alarming frequency. The Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, represented the largest federal climate investment in history, incentivizing renewable energy and electric vehicles. But scientific consensus warned that much more aggressive action was needed to limit warming. Artificial intelligence emerged as a transformative technology. ChatGPT's November 2022 release demonstrated AI capabilities that amazed and alarmed. Generative AI tools could write essays, create art, code software, and perform tasks previously requiring human intelligence. Concerns mounted about job displacement, misinformation, privacy, and AI safety. Tech companies and governments struggled to develop appropriate regulations. Political polarization intensified to extreme levels. Americans increasingly lived in separate information ecosystems, consuming news from ideologically aligned sources and social media algorithms that reinforced existing beliefs. Trust in institutions, including government, media, and academia, declined sharply. Political violence threats increased. Finding common ground became nearly impossible on issues from immigration to education to healthcare. The 2024 presidential election saw Donald Trump, despite facing multiple criminal indictments, win the Republican nomination again and defeat Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump's return to the White House reflected persistent economic anxieties and cultural divisions. His victory demonstrated that significant portions of America either supported or could overlook his norm-breaking behavior in favor of his policies. Chapter 12, Reflections and Future Horizons, 2025 and Beyond. As we reach 2025, America stands at a crossroads. The nation has transformed beyond recognition from the country of 1925. The population has nearly tripled. Life expectancy has increased from 58 to nearly 79 years. Technology has advanced from radio and early automobiles to artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and space exploration. The economy has grown enormously, creating unprecedented wealth, even as inequality has widened. Demographically, America has become far more diverse. In 1925, the population was overwhelmingly white and native-born. Today, America is increasingly multi-ethnic and multicultural. Hispanic Americans have become the largest minority group. Asian American population has grown substantially. Interracial marriage, once illegal in many states, is commonplace. This diversity enriches American culture, but also creates tensions as the nation navigates what it means to be American in a pluralistic society. Women's roles have transformed dramatically. In 1925, women had only recently won the vote and faced severe legal and social restrictions. Today, women outnumber men in college enrollment, occupy positions of power in business and government, and have legal equality in most domains. Yet progress remains incomplete, with persistent wage gaps, underrepresentation in leadership, and ongoing debates about reproductive rights. The economy has evolved from manufacturing-based to service and information-based. In 1925, many Americans worked in agriculture and factories. Today, those sectors employ small minorities while healthcare, technology, finance, and professional services dominate. This transition has created winners and losers, with many working-class communities devastated by factory closures, while coastal cities prosper from knowledge economy growth. Technology's pace of change has accelerated exponentially. Each generation now experiences multiple revolutionary technologies. The internet, smartphones, social media, and artificial intelligence have emerged within 30 years, fundamentally altering how we communicate, work, shop, learn, and interact. Future technologies, including quantum computing, advanced biotechnology, and continued AI development, promise even more dramatic changes. America's global position has evolved through distinct phases. The reluctant isolationism of the 1920s gave way to global leadership after World War II. Cold War competition drove foreign policy for decades. The brief post-Cold War moment of unchallenged dominance has yielded to a more complex world, with rising powers like China challenging American primacy. Questions about America's international role and commitment to alliances persist. Social attitudes have liberalized dramatically on many issues. Interracial marriage, once opposed by most Americans, now faces minimal opposition. LGBTQ rights have advanced from criminalization to marriage equality. Marijuana legalization has progressed from fringe position to mainstream policy, yet other divides have widened, particularly around abortion, gun rights, and the role of government. Trust in institutions has declined precipitously. In the 1960s, majorities trusted government, media, and major institutions. Today, such trust has collapsed across the board. Political polarization, corruption scandals, institutional failures, and social media-fueled cynicism have all contributed. Rebuilding this trust represents a major challenge for America's future. Climate change poses an existential threat requiring coordinated action. The burning of fossil fuels that powered America's industrial rise now endangers the planet's habitability. Transitioning to sustainable energy while maintaining prosperity demands innovation, investment, and political will that have proven elusive. America's political system shows signs of strain. Founded for a smaller, simpler society, institutions like the Electoral College, Senate representation, and lifetime judicial appointments create tensions in a modern democracy. Gerrymandering, money in politics, and partisan media contribute to dysfunction. Whether the system can adapt remains an open question. Despite challenges, America retains enormous strengths. Its economy remains the world's largest and most innovative. Its universities attract talent globally. Its culture influences the world. Its military remains unmatched. Its people are entrepreneurial and resilient. The Constitution, though tested, has survived. The promise of freedom and opportunity still attracts millions seeking better lives. The next century will bring challenges we can barely imagine. Technological change will accelerate, climate change will force adaptation, demographic shifts will continue, global power dynamics will evolve, new threats will emerge. How America responds will depend on whether its people can find common purpose and shared values amid diversity and disagreement. The story of America from 1925 to 2025 is one of triumph and tragedy, progress and setbacks, unity and division. The greatest generation defeated fascism and built unprecedented prosperity. The baby boomers challenged injustice and expanded rights. Generation X navigated economic turbulence. Millennials and Generation Z face climate change and technological disruption. Each generation has struggled with the tension between America's ideals and reality. America's founding promise that all people are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights remains unfulfilled, but continues inspiring. The nation's strength lies not in perfection, but in capacity for self-correction. The civil rights movement, women's suffrage, labor rights, environmental protection, and other reforms demonstrate that America, however slowly and imperfectly, can progress toward its ideals. The question facing America in 2025 is whether it can overcome divisions to address urgent challenges. Can a diverse democracy function effectively in the information age? Can capitalism evolve to provide broadly shared prosperity? Can America lead internationally while addressing domestic needs? Can it balance security and liberty, tradition and progress, individual freedom and collective responsibility? History provides no guarantees. Nations rise and fall. Progress is not inevitable. But America's story from 1925 to 2025 shows resilience, adaptability, and capacity for renewal. The same innovative spirit that created the internet economy can address climate change. The same commitment to rights that ended segregation can create more perfect justice. The same unity that won World War II can meet new challenges. Conclusion. This century-long journey from 1925 to 2025 reveals a nation constantly evolving, struggling with its contradictions, striving imperfectly toward better realization of its founding ideals. The Roaring Twenties boom crashed into depression, which gave way to war that made America a superpower. Post-war prosperity bred complacency, challenged by civil rights activists and Vietnam protesters. Cold War victory preceded new uncertainties. Technological revolution created opportunities and disruptions. Throughout, Americans have debated what their nation stands for and should become. Understanding this history helps contextualize present challenges. Today's political polarization echoes past divisions. Economic anxiety mirrors Depression-era fears. Social movements continue long struggles for justice. Technological disruption recalls Industrial Revolution upheavals. International tensions remind us that peace is never guaranteed. Yet Americans have repeatedly overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges through innovation, sacrifice, and commitment to democratic values. The next 100 years will test whether America's experiment in democratic self-government can endure. Success requires confronting hard truths about past failures while maintaining faith in future possibilities. It demands civic engagement, institutional reform, and renewed commitment to the common good. Most importantly, it requires recognizing that despite our differences, we share a common fate. As we stand in 2025 looking backward and forward, we see both how far we've come and how far we must go. The journey from 1925 to 2025 has been remarkable, transforming America and the world in ways those earlier Americans could never have imagined. The journey ahead promises to be equally transformative. Whether the next century brings continued progress or decline depends on choices Americans make today and every day forward. History is not destiny, it is prologue. The story continues, written by each generation in its turn.